The Final Fantasy IX Remake has to be one of the most rumored and talked about leaks of the last 10 years. It feels like ever since the Nvidia leak in 2021, this thing has just been talked about for years and years, and there still seems to be rumors coming out about it every day. So basically, what I'm trying to say is we want to talk about the stuff that's recently come out about the remake. There was recently a report that the remake might be canceled. And I know that that's caused a lot of people to throw all this stuff out about, was it even real or not? Is it canceled? Is it not? What's going on at Square? And so I think, we kind of just want to talk about the one thing I think, not just Final Fantasy IX Remake, potential fans, but Square Enix fans in general need right now, and that's patience.
Truly the greatest virtue of not just this entire industry right now, but Square's been going through like some restructuring and like just a bunch is happening. And I guess this is really what is making a bunch of people question this remake. Like we've had these Nvidia leaks for years. Like that happened like what, like 2020?
Yeah, the Nvidia leak happened in September 2021, and if you're not familiar with it, that it was a GeForce Now leak, and it leaked games like Kingdom Hearts 4, Final Fantasy IX Remake, Final Fantasy Tactics Remastered, Tactics Ogre Remastered, and as we know, like every game out of those except for Final Fantasy IX has been confirmed. Oh, and there was also a Chrono Cross remaster too.
So yeah, and well, literally everything on that list has either released or been announced, and well, except for Final Fantasy IX Remake. And just like again, like a couple years ago, there's like a Epic Games Store leak as well, where it actually had like day one DLC-esque listings tagged under FF9
Yep.
Remake for like triple triad cards and like some weapons. So the basic stuff we get with a lot of like the deluxe edition type stuff of like Final Fantasy games these days. So that's just two big vetted leaks. So that clearly has to mean something is being made, correct? We'd assume.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's important to realize, like, so I want to trace back to a rumor that happened, and this was a couple years back. This is by, I'm not going to talk about the leaker. The Persona leaker. I'm not even going to say the name. You know who I'm talking about if you know who I'm talking about. But a very prominent leaker at the time actually made a report on Final Fantasy IX and basically said that, it was development in out of house, outside of Square Enix, and Square Enix took it back in and basically rebooted it in-house development. Sounds very familiar to Final Fantasy VII Remake. And, there's other people that backed up that report. I firmly believe that that's probably what happened. And, so obviously this game was probably supposed to come out, a couple, this year or the year before or even earlier, but the reboot cost it. And now there's the potential news that it got canceled. And before we dive into, like what we think if it got canceled or not, I want to talk about mainly the big Square Enix reboots and reawakens plan, because I feel like, again, when we say that you need patience as a Square Enix fan right now, I feel like most people don't understand like what is going on at the company structurally right now. This new plan is completely shaping and changing the way that they are approaching development. There's a huge presentation where they outline this. It's a 3-year midterm plan. But as part of this, I mean, there were dozens of games that were canceled, right? They had, I think it was over $100 million of games that were canceled in development that they wrote off as a loss.
Yeah, like that's gonna be a lot of things changing at Square. They're definitely refocusing their development efforts because they've just had just really, really terrible luck the past decade with a lot of their like third party out of house titles. We've gotten games like The Quiet Man, Balan
Yeah.
Wonderworld, and we've gotten some good things because some of their like main projects are outsourced but are much more carefully looked at. A lot of Team Asano games aren't made in-house, but the team overlooks and probably makes all the design doc and everything. But that's not the case for some of this stuff. I figured they would have watched over FF9 like eagles if it was out of house, but we also know what happened with Final Fantasy VII Remake. And CyberConnect
Yeah.
2 makes pretty cinematic games that a lot of people love. And they couldn't even manage to get this to work out with Square Enix. So I think that's just the move. Whenever you're working with main series Final Fantasy, Remake or regardless, you have to just really have it under control. So I think that's the move, but that, that assuredly cost a lot and definitely cost a lot of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, that definitely costs time, assuming that happened. We don't know when it happened because we don't technically know how long this project has been in development, right? So there's no telling if this, when this project started development. But I want to ask I want to propose a question. Like, we firmly believe that this game is real. And the whole reason that we believe it's real is because all of the evidence points to it being real, right? The NVIDIA leak, everything lining up with that. There was the Epic Games database that listed 16 for PC and it listed FF9. And there's also, obviously all the stuff that has come out in this month as merchandise and artwork as well. And that's a huge talking point. I mean, Square Enix, yes, they celebrate anniversaries, but like if FF10 just celebrated a big anniversary the other day, and like they like made a tweet about it, right? But with FF9, there was a whole merchandise rollout. They got the original character designer and team to come back and draw new art, like a ton of new art. And there's a whole new merchandise, a new vinyl, new plushies, new just everything. I mean, Square Enix merchandise overload. And then obviously there's been like 3 or 4 like brand new art pieces. I mean, and we just saw brand new CG renders of, Zidane and Vivi on the Famitsu cover. So it's hard. I think it's hard to not feel like that there has to be something there because as treasured and as beloved as this game is, this is not the game personally that I would have expected Square Enix to just go all in on to celebrate an anniversary. This is not normal.
It certainly isn't, especially when you look at FF9's history. Yeah, you can hop on YouTube these days and find probably a million different videos, video essays, live streams. But back when FF9 came out, despite it being like a really beloved entry now and it reviewed well back then, it sold less than both FF7 and 8 because it was coming out like on the dawn of the PS2. And they announced FF9, 10, and 11 at the same time. So, everyone was like, oh yeah, 9 looks cool or whatever, and it sold well. It sold like 5 million on the PS1 or something. But everyone was truly looking towards the future. The PS2 was going to be out in months. FF10 was going to be out next year. Like, FF9 didn't quite have the same, legacy as FF7 or even 8. So, I think it would be strange. Like, it makes sense why FF7's been constantly getting merch all these years. It's because we haven't really not been out of the FF7 universe for a long time. But 9 is completely different in that regard. So I think having big merch drops, things like a picture book, like that anime thing that possibly might come out,
Yeah.
that's just not something you just do for an anniversary. Because like you said, we've seen a bunch of big important Final Fantasy anniversaries come and go the past few years. Like, we're not seeing a bunch of merch drops for Final Fantasy 4 or Final Fantasy, like anything older than really 6.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you hit it right on the money, right? It's like, we talk about that animated series that you mentioned. Like, so that was like this whole ordeal that got announced actually in 2021 as well. And that kind of kicked off this whole wave of like, okay, what's going on with FF9? Because they announced that in June and it was coming from a group called Cyber Group Studios. But the thing is as of April this year, they actually shut down or filed for bankruptcy. So we haven't heard anything about that, and I don't think that we probably will hear anything about that because, I mean, the studio's gone, right? But in terms of this remake, and in terms of the news as of late, you know, there obviously we talked about the new art and stuff. I mean, there are, you know, clear, new, distinct looks to these characters while still paying homage to the original designs. But like, I look at that Famitsu art in particular, like Zidane definitely looks different. I know people online when this came out today were like, "Oh, he kind of looks like a monkey," and I'm like, "You don't say, you don't say." But you know, I think that there's definitely just a lot of marketing going on right now for Final Fantasy IX. And when we bring it back to the report from this, you know, the cancellation rumor came from Nate Drake or Nate the Hate, who's been a pretty prominent leaker for the last couple years. I sit here and I think that there's two sides to this, right? One side is it would make complete sense if this did get canceled, and I think if it did get canceled, that Nate is hearing about it really late. Because I would expect if this got canceled, it would have been canceled with the whole plethora of games that got canceled and wrote off by Square, right? So if it did get canceled, I think that that's probably when it got canceled. But I will say, like, I do think that there is a chance that the cancellation news is somewhat of a, you know, wires being crossed because, you know, as we kind of talked about earlier, there was that rumor that the game got moved from out of house development to in house and got rebooted. And like, let's just be real, you know, even after the Square Enix news of restructuring, like, I wouldn't be surprised if they took a step back and were like, we're doing significant changes to the scope of what we were going to do with this game because we need it to align with our new strategy, right? So a cancellation, quote unquote, I feel like in this specific instance with this game can mean many different things. And so I feel like that, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, it's 100% in development, it's coming, because I mean, no one knows. I don't know that. You don't know that. But I will say that, like, I don't necessarily buy the fact that this just got canceled. You know, that doesn't necessarily, like, if it got canceled, that doesn't change the marketing and all the merchandise that they put out, right? They're not just going to pull that back. But at the same time, I just don't see them not taking advantage of what they've built up with this anniversary. I feel like that would be a waste. And I honestly, you know, I just don't think that, considering that this project has been in development for so many years, I kind of find it hard to believe that they would cancel it if it survived the initial cuts for the Square Enix Reboots and Reawakens plan.
Yeah, but then again, Square has a pretty interesting relationship with cancellations. I mean,
They do.
look at let's just look at a certain main series entry, the one that happened before 16. You know, a little game called, no, it wasn't Versus 13, FF15, that one.
The game that everyone swears is so different from Versus 13, and in reality, it's pretty close. It's pretty close. But regardless, you're 100% in the right. Like, Square canceling a game like this is not unheard of. For me, at least, I just feel like that if the decision, like, I don't feel like the project would have changed enough from when that plan went into effect versus, you know, it recently getting canceled, right? I can't see it. I don't know, because game development is very, you know, just all over the place and volatile. But I just personally am having just a hard time believing that if it survived the cancellation of the reboot plan, I don't think it would have gotten canceled after. But again, like I said, it could have gotten canceled with that reboot plan, and Nate is just now hearing about it, because that's how things sometimes work, right?
Yeah, because they could have, like, you know, had this big reassessment, put this plan in action, and just still couldn't get anywhere with this project. Because I've just heard small rumblings over the years anyway that FF9 Remake has been having just development issues, which isn't really shocking, just knowing how things can get at Square sometimes. But I genuinely do think a big part of this entire initiative they're running is kind of due in thanks to FF7 Remake, which we've kind of talked about this before. Because I think they kind of saw what was happening with that game. Like when you start getting original creators involved in a remake, which Square quite often does, they're gonna want to have their hands on it more. So it kind of just ends up making more sense to keep things like that internal. So there's part of me that wonders if this cancellation is just like, yes, this version, this idea of an FF9 remake is canceled, but we're gonna take like some of the assets that we made or like some systems and technically internally reboot it, almost like a Versus 13 to FF15 thing. But if I was gonna be just a complete cynic and just rolled with the this is just dead in the dirt, I would think they might attempt a remake again later, but then it would just make me feel weird about all the merch and extra stuff they're doing for this anniversary, quote unquote, because it would just feel like, oh, they're just trying to recoup and cut all their losses off of the FF9 remake.
Right, right. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I will say, like, obviously, yes, like the response to 7 remake, I feel like was definitely part of that. But I also think that just, you know, I don't feel like this is a topic that anyone can really disagree with, but like Final Fantasy, the brand value right now has been a lot of, especially for new people entering the franchise, a lot of confusion, mainly because, back in when Final Fantasy IX came out, it was this big homage to, the original Final Fantasies of, mystical crystals and fantasy worlds and stuff like that. And that's generally because, the games that came before it, very futuristic, obviously. And so I think bringing something like that back, especially after, 16 kind of brought back fantasy elements, but, it did, not kind of, but, in a new light being dark fantasy. And so I feel like bringing that back and offering another take on Final Fantasy is a great thing. And I agree with you. I think the response to 7 Remake was part of that. But I do want to say, we're talking about 7 Remake. So I have seen so many people be super apprehensive about this Final Fantasy IX Remake because they swear that Square is going to chop it up into parts and make it action combat and all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't understand why people would think that, just because that doesn't fit the scope of what this game would be. Like just from the outside looking in. And I get it. Obviously, the last Final Fantasy mainline remake we got is 7, and look what's happened with that. But that is like Square Enix's biggest game of all time. I mean, it is. And so that game, all the original creators are back. They split it up into 3 because, keep in mind, Final Fantasy VII is not just one game. There's a whole compilation. It's a whole, there's mobile games, there's movies, there's, spin-offs, there's this, there's that. So in an effort to combine all of that material into one, they split it up into 3 AAA games, right? That was the decision they made. And they also made the action, the action ATB system, right? Which has been awesome for FF7. Love it. But for FF9, FF9 is one game, right? Final Fantasy IX is a game. There's not a compilation that they have to worry about to make sure to include to match the lore and all this stuff. Like this, to me, the Final Fantasy IX remake is going to be as close to one-to-one as possible while expanding areas and making some of the towns bigger, right? And honestly, I wouldn't have even been surprised if, this game, if it comes out, if there are like fixed camera angles in certain areas. Like I truly anticipate this being very close to the original, and that turn-based combat system is gonna be there. I don't know why Square Enix would change that. It doesn't make any sense. It's not like there's arguments online that Square doesn't make turn-based games anymore, right? And that's just not true. I feel like most of the games that the company releases, or at least not most, but a huge portion of the games they release are all turn-based. They're just from smaller franchises that, most people don't look at. Like, Payne, you've played so many of them. They just released Bravely Default HD Remastered for Switch 2. That's a turn-based RPG. Amazing game, by the way. But it's like to act like that Square has abandoned turn-based and that if an FF9 remake comes out, it's 100% going to be turn-based or not. It's going to be action. I feel like is kind of ignorant on fans' parts. I feel like that you have to have a little faith in Square Enix and understand that this is a completely different beast than FF7.
Yeah, and the thing is, FF7, like, there's even that like snippet that they got from like a Yoko Taro interview of how he said the FF7 remake kind of redefines what a remake is, and that's something we've more or less said verbatim.
Yeah.
We can't really hold, honestly, any other remake ever made up to this point to the same like standard as FF7 remake and Rebirth, because they're turning what could have been like a a normal remake into the next like big chapter of mainline FF in a way. It's like FF7 getting another heyday. But I
Right.
don't think I don't think they're gonna do that with FF9 or change the battle system really, because we just look at a bunch of these other remakes, lower budget or whatever, than FF7 remake, and they're like just last year, Romancing Saga 2 remake. That game is immaculate and for sure lower budget than FF7 remake, but turn-based. We've also been getting a bunch of HD2D games. Like every Team Asano game has been turn-based in some sense of the word. Like, we're not in a big turn-based drought from Square. But I will admit we haven't really had many turn-based outings specifically for Final Fantasy outside of mobile. We've had a bunch of ATB stuff since 13, which for some reason people like saying that's not ATB or turn-based, but it is. It's, I guess, command-based is that the correct verbiage? Oh no,
Yeah.
but so we're only, because we're gonna just count the online FFs as like different entities, so we're really only two, if you really want to say three, mainline FFs out of the command menu based battle systems, which, to be fair, that has been like 15 years since FF13 came out. So I get why people are a little upset or worried that this could just be another action RPG, which I love both turn-based and action RPGs, but I really do think you're right. I don't think, like, even if they made FF9, if FF9 remake looks exactly like that Famitsu cover, I think it could still be turn-based. I think it could still have some fixed camera angles here and there, and I think it should.
Agreed. Because that's my big thing with this is it's like, I feel like that we have to kind of take a step back and realize that, if this remake is real, and this isn't an indicator of like, oh, well, Square Enix has a favorite child or Square Enix doesn't care about FF9, but like, just realistically, this game is going to have a lower budget than Final Fantasy VII Remake. And that doesn't mean lower budget means worse game. That just means that realistically, they're not going to be putting the time and the resources, likely not going to be into like, creating a brand new battle system for the game or, making an open world and all this stuff that just, at the end of the day, like, yes, there's a world to explore. Yes, there's a combat system that they're going to have to build based on the original game. But like, with the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, so much of that is just built from scratch, and you know what I mean. Like I just don't they're two very different projects in very different places, and so if this remake does see the light of day, I do think that it's going to be very faithful. It will be turn-based. It will look as good as a modernized Final Fantasy IX art style can, and I feel like it's gonna be great. My last piece on it, I know that there's been, people have talked about this. To be honest, I don't think that Sakaguchi will be involved. Maybe he will, but I don't think he will be.
I think at most he might get some type of special thanks or something. They might have some They might
Right.
include him in like a launch live stream or something, but I don't think Sakaguchi will have a major role. Another thing I was kind of thinking about the FF9 remake, I think, well, obviously we don't really know like the exact methods Square's going to use to restructure the company and like, presume development under more efficient ways. We don't know exactly what they're going to do, but you and I talk all the time about how amazing it is they churned out Rebirth in 3 years.
Yep.
So really, I think they're just gonna, if they're smart, I think they should stick with things that they have and things that they can build upon that already work. So like, if they did reboot FF9 internally, I think they might go at it from the angle of, especially now, like, we really do know that Square listens to when people complain. The problem is people complain too much. But
Yes.
the thing
Again, patience.
the thing is they do listen. So if they really do want to, make creating games as efficient as possible and getting things in our hands in an efficient manner, in a quality manner, I think they would want to try to make this FF9 battle system possibly the base for other spin-offs or other Final Fantasy games.
Agreed. Just like how we assume that 7R is going to be the base for potentially the next mainline Final Fantasy.
And I think that's just the way they should go. Like Kingdom Hearts has been iterating, but I think honestly the reason those take so long is due in part to Disney. But
Perhaps.
maybe a touch, who knows.
Yeah.
But
But I think you're right on the money. Like, it's better for them right now with this new development plan and about, cutting down development time in an era where games are taking longer to develop than ever and, preserving resources. Like, it's absolutely in their best interest to make a combat system that can be, I don't want to say transplanted, but I want to say like transplanted, to different games that they make in the future. And that's not like a one-to-one exact thing, but like if they can make, recreate an ATB, true style combat system from, based on the original FF9, they can take that and modify it for a future game as needed. But that takes out a lot of the heavy lifting. And, when we talk about like reusing assets and reusing stuff in development, I mean, we've talked all the time about the teams that do that, right? The Remake project has been doing that. It's paid off for them. I mean, you look at RGG Studio and the Yakuza games and how they put one out every single year, and it's packed to the brim with content. And that's because, take the first 6, they just reused all kinds of different maps that they built, right? And I mean, that just saves so much development time. And it's like, why go back and recreate that and make something new if you know you might use something similar later?
yeah, and like even the biggest of the big AAA games made like under Sony Studios and stuff that have budgets even bigger than Final Fantasy 16 will do things like reuse animations or build on top of models or use some old things. Like that's just how game development should work. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and especially don't tear it apart and build it from scratch. Definitely don't do that.
Absolutely. But I think at the end of the day, you know, we just kind of want to step forward and say, regardless of what's going on right now, I think just Square Enix fans and in general need patience right now. And, because no one can tell you how this company restructuring is going to work. I mean, this is something unlike anything that's really been going on before in Square Enix for quite some time, right? And so they're trying to do that and handle that while there's also other stuff happening in the background, like there is a private equity firm investing in Square Enix at rapid rates, 3D investment partners, right? And they are basically investing it, continuing to up their stake in Square Enix in hopes of getting Square to release the cash, right? And so that's causing things right now. And it's just, there's a lot going on at Square right now. It's really almost, I want to say, unprecedented times for the company. And so I think the best thing that we can do is just kind of have some patience and wait to see how this new development strategy plays out. Because again, like while it might be disappointing to see a leaker say that FF9 Remake is in development or it's canceled, I mean, me personally, I feel like that the evidence points to it being in development. Now granted, could have been canceled, absolutely. But with everything we know, I still feel that, if this is a real game, we're gonna see it in the next 2 years. So
Yeah, I just think if it was canceled, because even Final Fantasy spin-offs are probably like spin-offs and like smaller tier remakes and remasters are probably going to get more money lobbed at them than even your typical like Saga remake or remaster or Mono one. I think that's I think everyone can safely assume that. I just think it would be such a waste if they did outright cancel this game. I don't want to say it has like plot armor in a sense, because really, if they do deem it necessary, any company's gonna axe the project no matter what it is. But I just do not
right.
think FF9, I don't think it's gonna happen to FF9. And even if it was like this iteration or something got just axed, I do think we're going to see an FF9 remake at worst within the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it is an inevitability at this point.
That's not a
Now,
cop out,
granted,
by the way. I'm not just doing
no,
that.
yeah,
It's just like I think realistically we're gonna get one, like you said, in the next couple years. But I feel like if it truly did get canceled, it's something they're gonna pick back up.
agreed. Just because, again, it's a game I feel like that they obviously are invested in on the merchandise front. People online are obviously very excited about it, talking about it, this and that. I mean, it does feel like that, I think there is a world where, we got the Final Fantasy IX remake this year, right? Assuming it was in development and everything went to plan. But clearly things didn't. And, again, was it in development in the first place? We'll never, unless it gets revealed, we'll never know 100%. But evidence says yes. Is it in development right now? We don't know. We can only make an educated guess. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what I feel like has to be said is, have some patience, take a seat back, see what happens. But hopefully, things will shake out the way we want.
Yeah, because FF9 truly is like one of the fan favorites these days. And I feel like even before like it had like its renaissance era where people just really started gushing about it, that it had a lot of fans when it came out. This is an important game in Square's library, and honestly, I don't think they're just gonna leave it at just having simple remasters. And I feel FF9 Remake has to happen, especially before, because they've already had Kitase in interviews saying he would do other FF remakes. And I think having FF9 essentially lose out on getting a remake twice in its history, because, at one point they thought about making a FF9 remake on PS2 even. So
Right.
if it missed out on that twice and we see like an FF6 or 10 remake before that, that'd be honestly like a kick to FF9's legacy in a way.
Yeah, I mean, FF10 does not need a remake. Like that rumor just gives me a headache.
They just need to unremaster the remaster and fix like the character models.
Dude, that's an issue. That's an issue. But with that being said, guys, that's gonna do it for this quick little discussion on Final Fantasy IX. Definitely let us know down below. Are you potentially excited if this game ends up coming out? Do you think it's still in development? And what do you think about the current state of, Square Enix's Reboot and Reawakens plan right now as it stands? But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you next time.